everything we do at Holdsworth is anchored, I think, in hope, in some way. So I think my hope is that people who read the book see a path to how things might be different, and that generates hope at a time where things do feel pretty hard.
Welcome to Oxygen for Educators. I'm one of your hosts, Michelle Kinder, and you'll meet Chris Kent Phelps in just a bit. It's our hope to bring you thought-provoking, unscripted conversations full of actionable ideas to fuel your important work in the world. Thanks for tuning in. This space is for you. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Michelle.
Good to see you.
You too. Twice in 1 week.
Yes, and today we get to talk about Lindsay Whorton, Dr. Lindsay Whorton, who is one of the most embodied versions of the perfect balance of brilliance and humility that I've come across in a long time.
What a lovely thing to say about someone.
Yeah, I really, really took her juju in.
She's very impressive. And when you read her bio and then with all the words that you bring up in the podcast, it's very impressive. And she's also just very authentic and real, which I loved to watch.
Yeah, totally. Share that bio and then we'll get to the interview.
Let's do it. So Dr. Lindsay Whorton is a founding member of the Holdsworth Center, and she served as president since 2019. I love that she says in the interview that she knew she wanted to be a teacher when she was in the 5th grade, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But she's the recent author of a book called A New School Leadership Architecture, which you read and you guys discussed. But the book calls for a fundamental redesign of how leadership roles are structured and practiced in schools, offering a bold new blueprint to make jobs sustainable and give teachers the coaching and support they need so that students thrive. Obviously, a very much needed book right now. Under Lindsay's leadership, Holdsworth has grown from serving 7 public school districts initially to serving more than 1,900 leaders in 89 public school districts. That's impressive. And they focus on developing a bench of superintendents and principals for Texas public schools. One thing I found interesting is that when Charles Butt found her and offered her the position at Holdsworth, she was working as a education consultant at Boston Consulting Group. And I've gone up against Boston Consulting Group many times in sales pursuits, and they are ridiculously impressive and always won the business. So to me, that just jumped off the page as impressive. And I loved her work studying education in other cultures, which you guys will discuss. And then the one other thing that just really jumped out at me from the interview was this quote that Dr. Whorton delivered in your interview. Everything we do at Holdsworth is anchored in hope. My hope is that people who read the book see a path to how things might be different, and that generates hope at a time when things feel pretty hard. Hope unlocks energy and action. So I found her viewpoint very inspirational, and I hope our listeners do too.
Awesome. Let's take a listen. Hi, Lindsay.
Hey, good to see you.
It's great to see you. I'm so delighted to have this conversation with you. I was telling you before we got on that my list of questions got so out of hand for you because you're so interesting, like as a human, your work at Holdsworth, and now your new book that's out, which if you're watching on YouTube, this is the book. It's called A New School Leadership Architecture, and kudos to you. I really liked the book. Like, I read a lot and I'm discerning, and it was complex, original, accessible, actionable. Like, I'm inspired. I wish I was a school leader and could begin implementing what you offer and kind of how you offer people to think through their own situation and move through it in a really manageable way. It's just fantastic.
Well, thank you so much. It means a lot. It was a long journey. It took me 3 years to write that book, and I watch other people write books faster. but we all are on our own journeys.
Jerks.
But I do think, it's meaningful to hear that it was accessible and engaging, because I think some of why it took so long was trying to figure out how to present something complicated in a simple way. So it means a lot to hear that you experienced it in
Yeah.
that way.
You definitely did that, and it's complicated in accessible ways, and to me, it felt like, a really elegant mix of, like, an actual thoughtful plan that people could apply to their circumstances and find their way through, and it may look a little bit different here or there, but that's hard to hit that sweet spot.
Thank you. I mean, it's
Congrats.
working in Texas with as many schools and districts as we do makes it very clear that there's no kind of one size fits all thing that you can just pick up and drop down. But I think there are like truths and principles that can jumpstart our thinking. I think the other piece for me is like we operate with a lot of respect for the capability, the intelligence, the creativity of educators. So nobody needs to sit outside of a school and solve problems for educators. But how can those of us who support folks in schools offer some ideas, some principles to jumpstart that thinking, and then trust the people in those roles to figure out what it needs to look like here, in their classroom, in their school, in their community.
It's so respectful, and I can tell it comes from actually being in deep relationship with hundreds and hundreds of educators.
Definitely.
So when I pick up this 3-year gestation that now is a baby out in the world, like, do you feel like I'm holding your baby? Like I'm literally rocking it? Does this make you feel good or
Yeah.
does it worry you?
It's funny, the baby analogy. I mean, the last year that I was finishing the book, I was also becoming a parent of both a baby and a teenager who joined our family.
Oh.
So that analogy
Yeah,
has some specific things to it. But frankly, I think one, I was really nervous about releasing the book, because I think anytime you're working on knowledge and ideas, you're always learning things, and there's always gonna be something that you could have gotten more right. So I was really it was hard for me to be done because I felt like there was still more that I could do to improve it.
Yeah.
But it's been interesting to have that journey of the book coming out at the same time of this journey of parenting, because it certainly keeps all things in perspective, and so I think once it was out in the world, I've just kind of released that with a lot of hope that educators will find it useful, and we'll figure out how to take what's most useful and put it to work and help me improve and ignore, the pieces that
Yeah.
still have room to improve.
That's beautiful, and I'm certain it's going to do that, having also worked with lots of educators. And congratulations on your growing family. That's
Yeah.
incredible.
Thanks so much.
So you're like not busy at all with your huge full-time job, writing books, promoting books, raising a family. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not to jump too much into the book, but I think it's there's this idea in the book around going through what's called leadership passages. So when you move from leading in one way and being responsible for supporting the success of your classroom or your school in one way to getting a new leadership assignment, we talk about going through a leadership passage, which involves kind of reestablishing what your professional identity is. How do you see yourself? How do you see the most important value that's yours to contribute? What are the new skills, that you need? And then how do you need to shift how you spend your time? And one of the big ideas in there is we can't embrace our new leadership mission if we're still holding on to all of our old leadership missions. We have to let go of some things, let other people lead in those areas. And I think the same thing's true in our lives. And in many ways, that's the story of my life in the last year, is really thinking about what are the most important things, that need to happen right now. And how do you embrace those things and build those new skills and spend your time a little bit differently. But as long as we're clear on what's most important, for us, it's easier to make some of those other decisions. So book related
Ooh.
and life related.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, very parallel processy. And that notion that you're talking about of like having to release certain things in order to step into kind of the next, um, that's very powerful and very hard to do, especially if you've been in a certain role, like an individual contributor for a long time, and now you're moving into a different identity with different roles and responsibilities.
Yeah. Yeah, because we tend to get really well, one, we all like comfort, in the things that we're used to, and we get really attached to the things that we're good at. So I think this professional identity shift is one of the hardest ones to describe well. Um, but one way that I think about it is kind of our like professional highlight reel. What are the things that we're really good at that give us a lot of pride in our work, pride in our contributions, um, and I think we love being good at what we do. And so when we go through this change where we actually need to spend less time doing the things we've been good at in the past, we need
Right.
to embrace kind of new work, new responsibilities. There is this big identity shift to go through a process to see ourselves as a person who does different things and can build new skills and to be able to let go of some of those things that we're really good at, but are actually somebody else's job now. And it's our job to coach and support them. So I think we sometimes see the kind of external parts of these changes, but there's a lot of internal work for us to do and make those transitions as well.
Yeah, and I mean, we're gonna have to go backwards because I have like, how did we get here questions, but I can't stop this train. It's too juicy. Like systems that don't understand the inner work of those transitions really miss an opportunity, and often then we'll see the bumps around releasing that old identity, or just the bumps of like doing stuff you're not great at yet, that you, as compared to when you were kind of like in this other role and acing most of your responsibilities. If you don't have the frame you talked about, systems can like accidentally pathologize someone as not suited for the role, instead of understanding there's some ways to kind of support through that transition. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's kind of two things to break down there. Um, One is, have we structured the jobs that we've given people in a way that makes it really clear what their leadership mission is? What is their special job to do in supporting the success of the school, the success of their colleagues, and we'll come back to that. And then once we've done that, then how do we support people to make those kind of behavioral shifts to operate in that new role? Um, but I think we can't skip over the first one. And a common
Yes.
example that's like easy to pick up on is a lot of the teacher leadership roles that we have created in our schools today. And in the book, I draw this distinction between what I call team captain positions, and then team leader positions, or like team coach positions. And I think we've created a lot of team captain roles, which basically are positions where we don't give people more time to accomplish new responsibilities. We certainly don't give them additional compensation to do their responsibilities. And a lot of times we may not even really give them like the formal responsibility or authority that they would need. But we sort of say, go and figure out, how to lead in all these ways. And I think on one hand, what we're trying to do is to honor some of the excellent teachers and leaders that we have in our schools, but it also is quite demoralizing to be given like a task and a charge and not feel like you've been given the resources to meet it. And so if we're piling you up with more stuff to do and not more time, we're not actually setting you up structurally in the school to embrace that new work, and maybe to leave behind some of your old responsibilities. And so I do think this work starts with schools and districts saying, how do we actually make sure that we have the right number of people doing the right things with the right resources to accomplish those missions? And then we can turn to the task of, now that we've really given you the charge to be a team leader, how do we help you really think about what your professional identity needs to look like in this new role, how you need to spend time differently, and those key skills that you're going to need to hone or develop or demonstrate to be successful. So I think those are kind of the two sides of the coin that the system has to do to make this more possible for individuals to do.
That's a really powerful distinction because if you don't do that first piece, you could be an extraordinary facilitator of the second piece, but it's still not a winning formula. People are still set up.
Yeah.
Okay, I kind of want to keep on the book train and then
Okay.
we'll circle back to your story and then we can close with learning more about Holdsworth. But tell people what the 4 levels are and yeah, level is the word you use.
Yeah.
And just maybe kind of the general gist of the book.
Yeah. So before we get into levels, the general gist of the book is that I make the argument that we just keep piling more and more and more onto the plate of our educators. And that the jobs are increasingly, I use sometimes the jobs are increasingly impossible.
Mhm.
And I'd come at that from 2 directions. Like if we look at what's going on with the teaching profession, the job of teaching has just gotten more complicated, more high stakes, more intense over the last 20 to 30 to 40 years as our expectations have gone up, which is good for what we want all students to learn. And as the complexity of teaching and the needs of our students have continued to grow and evolve.
Yes.
And people talk a lot about, teaching turnover, lack of interest in the profession. And I think a lot of that at the core is we're asking teachers to do a lot, and we have not figured out how to give them the support that they need to feel like they can be successful day in and day out
Yeah.
at scale in that job. And particularly as we look at a teaching profession that is getting more novice, so you see this across the country, especially in Texas. A growing share of our teaching profession are under 5 years, under 3 years in their first year. And more of the folks entering our classroom today in 2026 may have had very limited training before they ever entered the classroom. And so we've kind of thrown a lot of folks in to swim on their own. And we don't actually have a system of providing really robust coaching and support to help people feel like they have someone to turn to. In tackling
Right.
some of the most complicated questions that face the profession. And we also don't give teachers a lot of time to do all the things
Right.
that we ask them to do. We can talk more about that. So I think that's one perspective on, jobs in schools being increasingly impossible. But if we look at principals, there's a similar story there. The job of the principal has also gotten a lot more complicated over the last 30 to 40 years. And we've layered more and more onto the principal's plate, but not taken anything off. And I think a lot of times we talk about those as 2 separate discussions. What's going on with principals? What's going on with teachers? We think those are actually linked to each other because principals are the ones who are often viewed as having the responsibility to provide coaching and support to all of those teachers. And if you've got 30 or 40 teachers in a building and 15, 20 of them are brand new, to think that one person or even one person in one AP is going to be able to provide the coaching and support that teachers need. I mean, we're just never going to get there.
Never. It would be laughable in most any other system.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so to continue to send the message that if everyone just worked a little bit harder, or had better skills, which we believe in, supporting our educators to hone their leadership skills. We think it's important. And of course, to bring the best that they have to their work. But if we just assume that that's all you need to do and you're eventually going to crack this problem, I think there's a structural issue. And so the book makes the case that we can't just keep doing the same thing and tinkering on the margins or doing skill development alone. We need to kind of reorganize how we think school leadership happens in a school. And before we get into the 4 levels, the kind of simple version of that is we can't expect principals to do it all. We have to allow principals to really hone in on their most important work as a school leader. And then they need to delegate and share more of those leadership responsibilities with more people, which the question is, who should they share them with? And one, we think we need to harness and elevate more of the excellent leadership that's in our classrooms, but not in that team captain assignment where we say, like, please go do this in your spare time, but where we really give people time and authority and compensation worthy of that work. So that's one piece. And then we've got to look at all the other roles that we have in a school, whether it's assistant principals, instructional coaches, instructional specialists, other administrators, and say, how do we really use these people most strategically? How do we put them in a position to really share the leadership of the school more effectively? And for every person to have a clear leadership mission, that all those missions add up to the most important work of the school. So that's the argument. And the 4 levels, the framework, is basically you've got team members. And to be clear, anyone can exhibit leadership. Leadership is the action of mobilizing others, bringing out the best in others to move towards important and good goal. And that can happen from any seat on the bus. But in addition to that, like leadership that everyone can provide, all organizations have roles that have specific leadership responsibilities. So that's what we're talking about with the levels. So you've got team members, and that's where most folks in an organization are going to be. That's where most of your classroom teachers are. And then we think you've got to have a level of leadership, which we call team leader. And those folks have the primary responsibility of coaching, encouraging, supporting their team of team members. And then to help that group move towards their most important goals. So for a grade level of classroom teachers, that's going to be, what are we trying to achieve for students, this year and the next 1 to 2 years? And what do we need to do to get there? And then we jump up, the 4th level is school leader. We know who that person is. It's the principal. And then we think, especially in big schools, and Texas has a lot of big schools, where if every team leader has 6 to 8 to 10 teachers that they're supporting, you've got a lot of schools, especially big high schools in Texas, where you're going to have dozens of team leaders. And so rather than the principal having the responsibility to lead and guide and coach, which is the other thing we often don't do when we give people leadership responsibilities, is coach and develop them. Rather than all that going to the principal, we think in a lot of big schools, you're going to need a role called a bridge leader role. That's not the title, but that describes the kind of work that they do. Whose job is to really develop those team leaders, help them connect to each other, have a shared vision, have some consistency in what goals they're pursuing and how they're pursuing them, and to cultivate and support leaders at that level. So those are the 4 levels. And I think it's like a framework to get started. And then I imagine a lot of principals will look at it and say, I want to tweak this idea to better match, my people, what we need to accomplish, but it's a starting point for that conversation.
I have an applause track in my head that goes off periodically throughout the day. And as you were describing the gist of the book and, sort of the way educators have been set up into impossible roles, and then what this allows them to kind of do to spark their thinking, like it went off a lot, just so you know. So one of the things I liked about the book is it helps readers, educators audit their current system and then progressively move toward making jobs feel more doable and more nourishing to both the students and the educators. Talk to me about how you did that.
Well, so this won't be a direct response. So if I'm off track, bring me back.
You won't be.
As I was, the book went through a few stages of review. And one of the areas of pushback that I got was that I spent too much time on the problem, which all feedback has a gift in it. And, I thought a lot about that and made some changes to how the argument was presented. But I actually think not skipping over the problem is pretty important for 2 reasons. One is sometimes we just jump to some new shiny thing that we want to do, but we don't really understand what problem we're trying to solve and what we're focused on. But the other reason is because I've found that as we've worked with educators, I think naming this problem is really important. So spending some time really naming why so many educators feel like despite their best efforts, they can't quite achieve the thing that they've been asked to achieve. I think is worth not skipping over. And I feel like I have a kind of unique ability as somebody who doesn't work in a school right now, to name that problem. Because if you're a
Yes.
principal or you're a teacher, um, you sometimes feel like you can't talk about what's so hard about your job because you come across as complaining. Um, but for me, I mean, I think this is, a 3 alarm fire in terms of what we're asking our educators to do. And I think it's important to draw attention to that. And we found as we've worked, especially with the educators who work in schools, there's a real emotional response to having this challenge named, because I do think there are
Yes.
so many people who feel so discouraged. It's easy to think, um, oh, it's just me. And if only I could find, some way to to find 10 more magical hours in the day, if I could figure out how to work harder, work smarter, um, I could overcome like what feels like not enough hours in the day, for the job that I've been given. So I think that's really important. And so we do ask folks to go through, there's some exercises in the book after we describe what the 4 levels are, to go through and to map, all the jobs that you have and where they currently sit. And we found, I think that produces a lot of insight of why people are experiencing some of the challenges that they are around coaching people and getting results. And a lot of times it can also start sparking you notice where
Yeah.
you have some additional capacity that maybe you could use a little bit differently. So we think that diagnosis is really important, not just to admire the problem, but because a lot of times the seeds of where you should go next are hidden in there.
Well, you said so much there. Going back to the naming it and the power of that, I feel like that there's 2 audiences for that. One is the external folks that you're sounding the alarm for. And then to your point, like the internal folks for helping them feel seen and understood and known, and for this to be something outside of them, not the kind of inside of them thing that creates those shame spirals that then just sort of like build on themselves. So I'm a therapist by trade, and there's no idea you can put in front of someone that they can absorb until they feel like you understand what the concern is.
Yeah.
Even in the room with the one family, in the room with one teacher, like this bigger concept really trickles down into the one-to-one as well.
Yeah.
Like, we need to feel understood. We need to feel like someone gets it before our minds and hearts can open up to, "Hey, there might be a way to do it differently."
Yeah. And ultimately, I think it's important too, because the kind of changes that the book is encouraging people to think about making are not kind of simple, technical, easy things to do. They're going to require like hard work, hard change around resources and how they're deployed, and it's not a simple path. And the only reason people are going to have and sustain the energy to do that hard work is if it's connected to a problem that they deeply care about, and I think that this is a problem that resonates with almost any educator, who's worked in our schools. And I think that connection is the energy that will fuel people to think through kind of the harder details of how you might change the system to get it to work better.
Well said. If this book has the intent that you hope it has on Texas, on the country, what will be different in 10, 20, 50 years?
It's a good question. The 10, 20, 50 might be like beyond my horizon of aspiration. Which honestly, because, and we'll probably get more into this in terms of my personal background, I think sometimes I think about change in 2 ways. Sometimes it's like you have this big grand plan, of where you're trying to go, and like you've clearly charted it, and then you're trying to drive all these actions and you worked it all backwards. And then I think at the same time, you have to be open to the way in which you take a step and then there's a reaction to that step, and then there's an organic kind of response, and you have to sort of see how that goes and evolves. And I think in a lot of ways, for me, the book right now is in that kind of latter point. We've put it out there. It's in the hands of the readers to react, to act. And I'm eager to kind of see how that takes shape. And so I don't want to get too far, ahead of that.
Yeah.
But I think at a really high level, I think in the short term, my hope is that reading this book, it names an urgent problem, but everything we do at Holdsworth is anchored, I think, in hope, in some way. So I think my hope is that people who read the book see a path to how things might be different, and that generates hope at a time where things do feel pretty hard. And I think that sense of hope then unlocks kind of energy and action. I think from there, I'm really eager to see, like, I've already heard from some folks, what do people do with these ideas? Like, what ideas do they come up with? What experiments do they run? How do those work? How do those help unlock kind of new capacity for adults and students in our schools? And then I think long term, and I think there's a lot of good work happening in this area. So it wouldn't just be the book; it'd be a variety of efforts. I hope in 50 years, we have new ways of thinking about what the role of a teacher looks like. We have new ideas about how to structure leadership in our schools, and that those new ways and those new ideas are ultimately like more sustainable for the people who work in our schools. Like, talented, mission-driven people can see themselves staying in education for many years, if not for a whole career, because they feel like these jobs are hard and meaningful, but things that they can sustain themselves in. And I think if we get that right, then our schools will be far more impactful for kids, because I think schools are fundamentally human-driven, human-fueled enterprises. And so figuring out how to make schools better places for our educators is also going to make our schools better places for our kids.
Hi, I'm Katie Whorton, producer of Oxygen for Educators. I want to spotlight our sponsor, TackieBox. TackieBox is an elementary school program that pairs innovative content with a tactile tool in daily practice to teach children to self-monitor their own words and actions and their responses to others. It's a proven tool that reduces behavior incidents by 66%. Through daily self-reflection, students build self-awareness, self-regulation, and meaningful connections. TackieBox is a light lift for teachers with a big impact on student well-being. Go to tackiebox.com to learn more and become a TackieBox district.
It makes me so happy to know you're at the helm at Holdsworth and that your work has such a extensive footprint in Texas, because the amount of respect and trust that is just like in your pores as you answer all these questions, it's just like coming at me in a really positive way. Like, you believe in the people doing the work and you see a systemic structural issue that is affecting them, affecting retention, recruitment, student outcomes, like all the things that if it can kind of shift 2 degrees, 10 degrees, 50 degrees, and unlock their creativity, their magic, their capacity to know what's best for their communities, then it will kind of ripple outward. Like, that's how I hear you when you talk about this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, a lot of that is rooted in probably my story to this work. So I grew up in Missouri, and as a kid, I would say there were like 3 big things that characterized me. One, I loved reading. I loved school, but I especially loved reading. I was a basketball player, and then I really cared about fairness and justice. I actually think a lot of kids specialize in really caring about fairness and justice. And early on, so when I was in 5th grade, I realized that I wanted to be a teacher. That it was just this perfect combination, so many things that I cared about. It's hard in the best ways. It requires your creativity. your intelligence. You've got to figure out how to work with other people, and that it makes a huge difference in people's lives. And so I kind of got just tunnel visioned on that as my path. I played basketball in college. I was certified to be a high school English teacher. And it was really in college that I started to zoom out and better understand, the way that public education works as a system, and the fact that education had opened so many doors for me and for so many people in my family, but that it wasn't working to open doors for everybody. And that there was still so much work to do to ensure that every kid, no matter where they lived, how much education their parents had, how much money their parents made, would find through education an open door to opportunity. So that kind of passion kind of expanded. And then I got routed away from teaching. I had an opportunity to go to graduate school abroad. I lived in England and Finland for 4 years. And for most of that time, thought that I was going to come back and I was going to be a high school English teacher and coach. And things kept kind of going a little differently than I expected. And while I was living abroad, I studied international education. And I won't get into the very niche thing that I studied in my doctoral work. But I had an opportunity to start, and I've continued doing this through my career, to be an observer of international education systems. And one thing I always say as a caveat is the study of other systems isn't about picking up what somebody else does and just like plopping it down cookie cutter style in our system. People criticize that. It's true. But what can be so powerful about living in other countries, living in other cultures, studying other systems is it's a really interesting mirror for noticing things about yourself. And why do we assume that things work in a certain way when there's so many people who do this differently, and get good results? And
Yeah.
and as I was observing, studying international education systems, one thing I took away was that all of the countries that are really high performing get really strong results, have pretty low variation between their highest performing and the lowest performing students, have less predictability between a kid's background and how they perform, the kind of results that we aspire to want to have. They all have a couple of things in common, and one of them is that they've made these deep investments over many generations into having a strong teaching profession. That there is actually no way to skip over attracting, equipping, and honoring people in how those systems work. And the other thing that I noticed, and this was especially true in Finland, is that those systems really honor and recognize teacher voice. People pay a lot of attention to what teachers think. Their voices, their opinions are taken into account. And one thing that stood out to me at that time is I don't think that that's as true in the U.S. as I would like it to be. And even like sitting in this role, I think people are a lot more likely sometimes to listen to folks who like lead nonprofits in the education space or other folks, and may not have as many pathways to hear from educators directly. And so I think one thing that has shaped, skipping ahead, but one thing that has shaped how I approach the work at Holdsworth is like I really want Holdsworth to be a place that points people back, towards the folks who should be the primary leaders, in this space, points people back to folks working in school, points people back to folks working in districts. But so I was doing that international work. I came back. I did a couple of different things. I worked in politics for a state elected official who did education policy, and then I worked in the private sector. And then I met Charles Butt, and he told me about this vision, they had for Holdsworth. We can talk more about that. But what stood out to me was that this was an organization that was going to be focused on one of the key things that I believe is essential to how you have a great education system, which is investments in people. And so that's really kind of what drew me back here. So I think there has been a through line for me, and part of why I'm here is because I really believe that there is no path to the system that we want to have without really investing in like a deep way in teachers. And I also think there's no path to the system that we want to have that doesn't go through treating those folks with like respect and dignity and honoring them. And so doing the work we get to do every day, we get to know, hundreds, thousands of teachers, principals, and district leaders. And they're just remarkable people who I feel encouraged that they're serving our students and lucky to know. And so it's easy to lift them up and to point people towards them as like the real experts that we should be paying attention to.
It's such a mirror to why we started this podcast, is we wanted to really elevate the voices of the people doing the work and help them, hijack back the narrative that had been hijacked from them. So I love that. Wow. What else from your personal story? Because I notice your humility in the way you tell it, because I remember some words in your longer bio, which I'm sure they forced you to publish. just knowing you for an hour, words like Fulbright Scholar, Rhodes Scholar, that you were getting, was it an advanced degree at Oxford that then led to your work studying other systems?
Yes.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah, all of that is true. It's funny though, because the only other detail that'll sort of bridge those things. So I grew up in Independence. My parents both grew up in small towns in northern Missouri, and my grandfather, my mom's dad, was a carpenter who built a lot of the houses in Maysville where they grew up, and he actually built the house that they lived in, this house that he was building for them while he was building it. But he was a community leader. He was on the school board. I mean, he had all of these other community leadership roles. And as a kid, he would call me on Sundays, and he would always recruit me to come to school in Maysville. I mean, he was really proud of his community. But when I was an adult and I was getting ready to take this job, I was visiting him. He was in his 80s at that point and had recently retired or was in the process of doing that, and was asking me, what I was going to be doing. I explained something to him about Holdsworth, and he said, well, granddaughter, and this is what he called me throughout my life. And he said, it sounds to me like you shouldn't be telling those people what to do. And I said, Grandpa, you're right. And the good news is I don't think that that's how I see my role, because these are really capable people. Our job is to provide like support and resources and encouragement. But I connect those things to say, yes, I got all those degrees. I had those experiences. They were transformational opportunities for me to like learn about the world, learn about myself, and are certainly, helpful to the work that I'm doing now. And big fancy degrees are not actually the primary thing. And I have lots of people around me who remind me that there's like more to life, than the degrees and the honors. And so I think I'm guided by those roots and that upbringing and a real sense of recognition, that we work with extraordinary people, and who am I to tell them what to do?
Your grandfather called a granddaughter?
Yeah.
That's so great. Okay, so anything else you want to hit about your path that would be interesting for folks to learn about before we transition to Holdsworth?
I'm generally very happy to not talk about myself. And so if there's anything you want to talk to, I'm happy to. But otherwise, I'd love to talk about Holdsworth.
I have one question, because so much of your work is supportive around sustainability of others. What is it that sustains you? Like, do you have some habits, some practices, some relationships? Like, how do you stay grounded and resourced and sustained?
I think that's an interesting question for me at this time, because I think I had an answer to that question pre-parenting. And I think I'm in the process of kind of reconstructing, my answer to that question, which I'll share just because I'm sure I'm not alone, in going through that transition. So I think I'm pretty introverted. And And so a lot of the job that I have, which is very focused on interacting with and supporting other people, is where most of my kind of relationship energy goes. And
You're
so I think
out of words by the end of the day.
yeah. And so in this season, since I've been doing this job, I've found that rest and restoring and sustainability for me, one, involved needing to carve out a lot of time when I wasn't working to kind of be with myself. So reading was a big practice. And I think being when you're in a leadership role that is kind of at or close to the top of your organization, the way that ideas come to you are a little bit different. And so also having like lots of sources of challenge and inspiration, I think, is important. And for me, books was a big way that I did that. I mean, having an exercise practice has also been important. I haven't always been as consistent about it as I would like to be, but when I have it, it's really good for me. I think it's one of those things that you feel like you never have time to do. But then once you start doing it, you realize how generative it is, for your energy and for your time. So I think as we transition into like my parenting life, this time, these long stretches of time where I used to read my books are not the thing anymore. So I think I'm kind of I'm reconstructing, what that looks like. Finding, joy and inspiration and like these reminders to slow down, and spending a lot of time with a toddler. And then I think starting to figure out how to get that rest and get that inspiration in like shorter blocks of time. But it's very top of mind for me that I'm kind of in a period of like rebuilding what those systems are going to look like.
I so appreciate that. It's so relatable, whether it's as like kind of joining the parenting world, or I feel like the pandemic, post-pandemic, like so many times you really have to reinvent your mental health recipe, and kind of normalizing that, and people getting to hear that you're like deep in the middle of that even as we speak. And yeah, so nice.
Probably the other idea that's anchoring for me is I view life as a series of seasons. And so don't really believe that the charge is to figure out how to fit in everything that's important to you in every season. And I think accepting that there are some seasons where there's some things that are important to us that are not for this season, that we'll get to do more of, that we've gotten to do more of in the past, we're going to get to do more of in the future. And I think that has been really helpful to me, because sometimes you are just at a point where there's not room for some things that you want to include, but you can suffer a lot by feeling like you're still trying to work them in. And so being able to like accept and embrace, and sometimes those seasons may just be a couple of weeks. Like I'm going to enter a couple of week seasons where I really have to go all out, in one direction, or maybe there are a couple of months, maybe there are a couple of years. And I've found that has been really helpful to me.
That is, yeah, because then you're not like punishing yourself for not being able to do all of it all the time.
That's right.
Nice. So before we wrap, if people know nothing about Holdsworth, give us a 101.
Yeah. So I'll pick back up at the point in my personal story where I met Charles Butt. So that was in 2015, and I wasn't from Texas. And so to my great embarrassment, I can say that I did not know who Charles Butt was before I met him. And he's a wonderful person who I can't believe, So I got this chance to meet him. And at that time in 2015, Charles had been the CEO of HEB for a long time. And he had always been a huge supporter of public education in Texas. And he got kind of that commitment from his mom. So his dad had helped to really grow and establish the business, HEB. And then his mom, Mary Elizabeth Holdsworth Butt, had started her career as a teacher in the Hill Country and had spent the rest of her life really being a champion for children, for mental health issues, and for vulnerable people across Texas. And so she had really instilled in Charles this sense of responsibility to do what's right for others, and in particular, to care a lot about our public schools. And so this was not a new idea for him in 2015. HEB is very generous and very charitable and had created the Excellence in Education Awards in the early 2000s to recognize great teachers, great principals, great school districts. Charles had created a nonprofit called Raise Your Hand Texas, which was founded to advocate for public policy that supported public schools. And that had happened in the first 10 years of the 2000s, which I think I'm told is the aughts, but I always feel weird saying. And so when I met him in 2015, I think most people who had done what Charles had done would have thought, I've done a lot of great things for public education. I can feel good about that. Not Charles. He was sitting around feeling like he had not done enough. That there was still so much work to do to support our public schools, and thinking, I haven't done enough. What more can I do? And so he had gotten advice from a bunch of smart, well-informed people about what his next kind of support or investment in public education should be. And he had been encouraged to think about leadership as his primary focus. And there's a lot of research that after teachers, principals are the second most school level factor in what influences student learning. So there's a lot of research behind this idea of leadership. I think it's intuitive that having a great superintendent really matters. It's harder to prove that in the research, but I think that that's intuitive. And that really resonated with Charles, who runs an organization, HEB, that actually has a lot in common with the school district. You have stores, you have schools, and then you have a central office, you have corporate. And if you ask anybody at HEB, they're going to say the most important factor in the success of the company is having a great store leader. And so this idea that helping principals be strong leaders, helping superintendents lead well, and every leader in between, that made intuitive sense to Charles. So when I met him, he had created this organizing board to say, now go off and tell me what would be the best way to tackle, this question of how to build strong leaders for our public schools. And what came out of that initial effort was this program called the Holdsworth Partnership that was focused on helping school districts across the state of Texas really invest in, build up future principals for their district. And so we've been doing that work since 2017. We're 9 years in now, have learned a lot. And so that was where we started. And then in 2021, we launched a new set of programs focused on how do we support new superintendents that are moving into that role to be able to succeed, to stay, and be impactful for kids. And then from there, we've built out a series of efforts that are going to be growing soon to identify folks who could be great future superintendents earlier in their careers and really help them get ready. And then next spring, we'll be launching a new program connected to my book to help schools and districts say, yeah, principal is really important, but we got to rethink, the whole team. So across those kind of three areas of emphasis, principals, superintendents, and then leadership teams, we run a variety of programs that meet here. We have a campus in Austin called the Campus on Lake Austin. It's like a
Beautiful campus,
like a small university campus with a hotel on site. And so the folks who are enrolled in our programs come here 8 to 10 times over a year or two for short 2 to 3 day sessions. You can think of it like the structure of an executive MBA or an executive course. They do the learning here on campus with their teams, and then they go back to the district to implement what they've learned, and we support them with coaching and a whole bunch of other ways. But Texas is big, 5.5 million kids, 1,200 districts. And so we've grown our programming significantly, but there's still a lot of work to do to meet the need across a state as big as Texas.
And your campus is reflective of your energy, and I'm sure that the whole team's energy, but it's so beautiful. It's top notch. Everyone is treated as if they were Charles Butt. Like, it's just, it's impeccable. The micro messages, or the macro messages, I guess. Our dogs agree. Sorry about that.
Totally.
It's just a beautiful campus, and the experience of being there is so different than what a lot of educators are used to, unfortunately, when they have professional development experiences. And I feel like that's part of y'all's magic.
Yeah. And that's a real credit to Charles. I mean, for a while, like, I almost think you could think of Holdsworth as the combination of, like, I have two distinct missions. You know, we have our programs that exist to build skills, support districts to think about effective leadership. But in some ways, those could have happened anywhere. But Charles really had this vision for a campus that I almost think of as like a monument that's intended to send the message to educators of how much you matter, how important you are to the future of the state and the country. And though you're not told this enough, you know, that you are like some of the most important people in our society. And then it's also intended to send the message to people outside of education, like, hey, these are some of the most important people, and like, we need to do more to recognize and to value them. And so that really is a testament to Charles and that vision that he had. But it is remarkable. This has happened less and less because people kind of know what they're getting into now. But when we had folks first join our programs, you know, the common questions that she would get would be like, wait, so I don't have to have a roommate, you know, because the campus is built to really give people an experience that, with the budgets, you know, that we have in public schools, it is not common, you know, for teachers and principals to experience.
It's a true retreat, which I feel like, in addition to sending that very strong message that you matter, it puts people in a nervous system state where they can learn and they can get creative and they can have different conversations with their teammates than maybe they're having somewhere else.
Yeah. And there's even, I mean, it's on the water, and there's research that when you're looking at water, there's something that happens to your heart rate. I mean, even if you're looking at a painting of water, something happens to your heart rate. So, I mean, there is some science to the magic of the way the place is designed and that space for reflection and openness that it's intended to create.
Incredible. You have to be so proud of what y'all are doing and your space and education and in Texas and in what's possible and hopefully what's coming in terms of waves.
Yeah, it's a real privilege to get to be a part of creating something that's going to exist for a very long time. And we're grateful for the support of people like Charles and other donors who have come along to make that possible. And I and the team, you know, take really seriously that there's a lot of need. And I think this is a really important time for public education, and there's a lot of work to do, and we feel really honored to be in a position to do work that really matters, and we take really seriously the need to work as hard and think as creatively as we can about how to support leaders across the state to the best of our ability.
Well, just in 1 hour, I feel like I would follow you straight off a cliff, so please don't lead me there, but you inspire so much confidence. Like you just come across as so grounded and so authentic and so like you're holding the charge and the possibility that's in your hands with such care.
Thank you.
Thank you. And when we decided we would have this conversation, was there anything you wanted to make sure we covered that we haven't touched on?
There's one other thing, and you asked the question and I forgot to say it earlier. So the one thing I do always want to clarify, the piece I feel most nervous about with the book is that anytime we hear levels, we think hierarchy. And it is not... And I think I'm still trying to figure out the best way to describe this. That's not the spirit with which I want to push us to think about clearer levels. Because I think we must get clearer about how we're organizing leadership work, and be clear about what everybody's responsibility is. I don't think that means, as we get clearer, that we must operate with a sense of like top-down command or power over others. And so I think there's a way in which we can expand the number of people involved in leadership. We can clarify who has what responsibility and how they relate to each other. And we can do that in a way that is about sharing power and not about like concentrating it. And I think that people can get so nervous about that, particularly in schools. So I'm continuing to try to clarify that levels and hierarchy do not need to be married to each other, and we can make a choice about how we lead together in any structure that we put together.
That is so important. I'm glad you said that. It's like a liberating structure, not one more way for people's like more heavy-handed or controlling or us and them or I have more say than you, like all of those kind of shadow sides. Yeah. Thank you for that. Anything else? I feel like I could talk to you for 8 hours straight and never tire, but so I've
really enjoyed
to end it.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, and really enjoyed the conversation and appreciate all of your thoughtful questions.
Well, we'll definitely stay in touch, and I'm going to be cheering for you, for the book, for your work at Holdsworth. We all will. Thank you for your time and just for being you. Like I just feel so attached to you after 1 hour. This is so weird, but I'm gonna just trust it and keep cheering for you.
Thank you so much.
We'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye. Hi, Chris. Welcome back.
Thanks. Great interview.
She's something.
She's great.
Objectively. Yeah.
She's great. And I really want to read her book now.
Yeah, you'll like it because it actually has implications for other industries too. I don't think it's just education, what she has to share about both like rethinking what we think we've always known, and then also like setting people up for success instead of just like shoehorning someone into something and crossing your fingers and hoping it works.
And just life in general. I felt like a lot of the things that y'all talked about applied to education or criminal justice or the political system, but also life in general.
Yeah. Love it.
And that's me not having read the book. And apologies to Lindsay that I have not yet.
Well,
but I did enjoy the interview.
If it teased you to want to read it, then
mission
fabulous.
Accomplished. Yeah.
And
she'll get a book sale.
Yeah, totally. I hope people do go get the book because I've been thinking about different folks that I've worked with in the past in either coaching or just supporting their schools that I want to like either send it to them or at least send an email to say, this will be useful.
Tell us before we dive into what stood out, what has been your relationship with the Holdsworth Center? Because you guys have crossed paths professionally prior to this podcast, correct?
Yes, in a very limited way. I just went and did a day training for them for one of their cohorts. And it was very interesting how they structured the cohort. It was, I think, 6 or 7 districts, and it was the superintendent and 5 of their key leaders. And they were in, I can't remember the span, but it was either a year or a 2-year program. And so we did a day training about the nervous system and, prioritizing mental health of themselves and their teams.
Got it. Interesting.
Yeah.
HEB has been, as you know, a long supporter of Tacky Box work. And I loved knowing that Charles Butt viewed HEB and the stores similar to education. That's just such a brilliant parallel to make. Not just make, but then go and do something about it.
Yeah, that was very interesting. Mm-hmm. It was.
Did you know that prior to that conversation?
I didn't.
Yeah, that was really interesting.
I only know about him through whatever's like publicly so out there. So to hear her, who's in deep relationship with him, talk about him with such care and reverence was really special. And the whole time I was thinking, when she was talking about him, I was like, what a juxtaposition from some of what we're seeing in our country right now in terms of very wealthy, powerful people with no spine and no care for others. And, just there's so much awfulness going on in that realm right now that to hear about him and his integrity and his clarity of purpose and his generosity, his vision, like that felt a little salve for the soul for me.
Mm-hmm. And as a mother of a son, that he named the center after his mother too.
Oh,
that really touched me.
You want Jake to grow up and name a center after you one day?
I do, or something.
It's so good. Oh, and the center has two names, or there's two stories behind it. The one we heard, the other one is Holdsworth. That educators and education holds worth. So they talk about both. Isn't that lovely?
I love that. That's great. Okay, so let's talk about her book just a little bit. I loved her focus on naming the problem, especially that she got feedback that she stayed there too long, but she went with her gut anyway. And I specifically liked the fact that what she said was naming fights the discouragement currently being felt. And I liked the word discouragement because we use the words burnout and overwhelm so frequently, but we don't talk about what that causes, which is that discouragement. And it's interesting, as we were working on the magazine, which will come out the week of March 23rd, by the way, first Oxygen for Educators magazine. But we were accumulating going through all the interviews from last year. And that was one of the things that the editors brought to my attention, was that the words burnout and overwhelm were used so many times. And so I felt like Lindsay brought a different viewpoint, or a kind of an expanded thinking around that with the words discouragement. And it made you feel how hard that must be to feel like somebody whose why is so deep in their choice to be an educator, the frustration that has to come with, I can't do what I want to do every day. I can't do what I want to do each year because there's so much added to my plate. And I liked the way she said, just the job has become impossible because expectations have increased, needs have increased, but resources have not increased. Like, that's a very simple way to put it.
I had a quote where she talked kind of to your point. She said that we have to stop the narrative. If everyone just worked a little bit harder and had better skills, that we would get the outcomes we want in education. But instead, it's really a structural and systemic issue. And that until we address the structural and systemic issues, I mean, I definitely noticed this in my years doing leadership work, that until you address structural and systemic issues, you are seeing what you think are personnel issues through a distorted lens. Like, you've got to do the structural and systemic first, and then give that time to settle. And then that's when you know if you have a personnel issue or not. Sometimes the people who look like a personnel issue might be the healthiest people in your system. They're reacting to structural and systemic issues that are giving them an allergic reaction, and it looks like dysfunction or underperforming or whatever. And when you fix the systemic and structural, then they become your highest performers. Not to like layer this too deep, but I saw the same thing in family therapy when the person that we used to call the identified patient, the identified client, whoever the family brought in as saying this person is the issue, after you get in the system and start looking at it, very often that person is the healthiest person in the system. They're just sounding the alarm. Same in schools. Sometimes your people who are acting out or underperforming might be sounding an alarm.
So interesting. So interesting.
What else jumped for you from her book?
Well, I appreciated that it seemed to me that her viewpoint is the answers can be found from the people already at the table.
Yeah.
We just need to help jumpstart thinking and then let them work their magic to solve the problem, as opposed to all of those of us on the periphery thinking that we can help come up with the solution. That's not the answer. The people on the front lines are the ones who can come up with the answer. They just need the space to do that.
Yeah, that was profound.
Really profound. And it's so simple. And it feels obvious, but I don't think I've ever heard anyone else say it that way.
It's not how we function, at least in Texas. Maybe other states are doing a better job, but we've done a terrible job of elevating the voices of the people doing the work and listening to them and letting solutions bubble from their expertise as opposed to external folks, thinking they have the magic bullet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it made me even more excited about all the conversations that we'll have this year.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Kind of connected to that, I liked how she said that when she was studying education in other countries, that what came forward is that there is no shortcut. There's no path to our hopes around education in future generations without hearing from educators directly and honoring and recognizing teacher voices and opinions have to be taken into account, that there's no shortcut unless there's deep investments to a strong teaching profession. She said, no way to skip over attracting, equipping, and honoring educators. Like if we don't do that, we're not going to get what we hope for. And what's interesting to me is I think people get that, but there's not the political will to shift how we behave in this country toward educators yet. So I'm curious, at what point is there a tipping point? How do we get there? I don't know.
Well, and as you said, that's the purpose of us doing this podcast and the magazine, is to try to create a space where those voices can be heard. So here we sit.
Yeah. Everybody pitch in a little and see if we can get there. Absolutely.
I also liked when she was talking about Finland's education system and just her comparisons. It just made me think of the criminal justice system is the same way, right? Mm-hmm. We create it, and then it's we just keep bolting on instead of going back to the drawing board and saying, hey, maybe we got this wrong, or maybe what once was right is no longer right in the way that the world has changed, and really think more expansively. But again, I do think that she offered such a hopeful solution in the answer is there. We just have to create the space to let the people with the firsthand knowledge think critically and make changes.
She, to me, felt like the most embodied example of what it looks like to solve problems from a space of hope instead of fear. It was just very gentle. Mm-hmm. It's just hey, here's how we might come at this. Here's what I'm seeing. Here's what I'm learning. Here's this. It just felt very soaked into her bone marrow.
She was very direct. Everything we do at Holdsworth is anchored in hope.
Yeah.
She doesn't shy away from that, which I loved. So she's got a little bit of idealism in her too.
Yes.
I liked it.
Yes.
I loved her description of teaching when she talked about, I knew in the 5th grade that I wanted to be a teacher. And I hope that listeners will identify with this. It made me think, wow, what a lovely profession. Teaching is hard in the best ways, requires creativity and your intellect, requires you to figure out how to work with other people, and you make a huge difference in the lives of others. I mean, what else is there?
Well, it's everything you've been talking about. It's like the most powerful lever if we're going to have a different future. And how do we start acting like that?
Mm-hmm.
So good. How about the way she talked about her grandfather?
Granddaughter.
Oh my God, I loved that so much. And you could really feel that string going forward, that humility from her roots.
Mm-hmm. And not trying to be the one with the answers, even though she has the credentials to be the one with the answers. That's just not her approach.
Yeah.
Which
really,
is lovely.
Really, really lovely. So invitational, so respectful. Yeah, I really liked her. How about when she talked about her own personal coming to understand that life is a series of seasons? I thought that was really powerful too.
It was powerful personally just to hear the reminder.
Yes.
It's just good advice for all of us. That,
Yes.
It looks different. And I also liked y'all's discussion around, and as a result, your mental health toolkit has to change with the season.
Yeah.
And not, I think she said, if you try to keep, or one of you guys said, if you try to keep all the same things as part of your mental health kit, when the season looks different, you can suffer as a result because there just may not be enough time for all those things.
Yeah, she said that. I loved that. I mean, I really hope listeners let that sink in. It reminds me of that double arrow thing, which we've talked about before, but I'll bring it up again. It's the idea that whatever's happening in your life might hit you like an arrow, but then we sometimes bring in a second arrow by punishing ourselves for how we're reacting or what we can't get to, or that this season makes it hard to prioritize X, Y, or Z. Like, a lot of our suffering comes from our own narratives around what we are or aren't doing right, quote unquote, or well, or whatever.
I wish every one of our listeners had a you that they could carry in their pocket to remind them of these things like I get to do.
Do you carry me in your pocket?
Well, kind of, because we talk so much. But I would be pretending if I said I was good at doing that by myself. It's you always reminding me.
Well, and I would be pretending if I said I can internalize and actualize the things I know intellectually all the time, because I certainly can't. There's a bridge between those two that sometimes I navigate well and sometimes not at all.
I don't know if I believe you, but
stick around, sis. What else?
Okay, this is one thing that I think it was in the same piece of the conversation, but I loved, and she was speaking about leadership, or you guys were, but to me, it just applied to life. About you can't embrace the new thing unless you let go of the old things that you were good at.
Yeah.
Like, we tend to hang on to those things because we're comfortable, we're good at them. There's probably some identity tied up in that, but really to grow and move to the next place, you have to let those things go so you can try something new.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a fable, or I don't know if fable's the right word, but
Probably not.
Yeah. Legit, probably not. Based on past experiences, it's almost certainly the wrong word. I can't remember. I'm going to butcher this, but I'm still going to offer it because it changed me to hear it. The story is that it used to be normal that you would go through life and then you would shed the skin when you're old, and then you would start a new kind of chapter with this fresh skin. And in this
quote unquote fable. This old woman goes to the river, she sheds her skin, and comes back to her village, in kind of fresh, new, vibrant, whatever. And everyone rejects this version of her. And so she feels like she has to go back to the river, and thankfully her quote unquote old skin was caught on a branch and she puts it back on because she wasn't accepted by her village in this new form. And I have no idea if that makes any sense or if Katie's going to have to cut it, but but to me, the way I internalize it is like that's true. It's like, can you shed your skin of whatever leadership role or role you have in your school to then walk in and become this new version of you? Or are you so attached to your old skin, or are other people so attached to the old version of you that there's like these impediments to you stepping into the next version of yourself and what's possible?
All right, you saved it. You saved it there with that
Swear
connection.
to God,
that was good.
Google the story. It's so much better than I told it.
It makes sense.
People are going to be like, please hospitalize Michelle, because I read the actual story and it's a lot better. But
that makes sense. That makes sense. I was listening to Chip Conley's podcast yesterday, and I'm not going to remember the name of the guest. Apologies, Chip. But it was the author of a book called The Comeback. And have you heard of that book?
I don't think so.
It made me want to get it. But he was talking about when hard things happen and then you're, in the comeback phase, people typically view the comeback as going back to where they were before that. But you can't fit. So in your analogy, putting the same skin on doesn't fit anymore after you've gone through the hard thing. And so it's like, I guess the book is supposedly, I have not read that. I ordered it yesterday.
Yeah.
It's the kind of his formula for doing the comeback differently, which would probably align with Lindsay's message.
Yeah. And the experience of so many people who are listening right now. Yeah.
Okay. There's one more thing I really wanted to, this is a tiny little point, but I love that when she was talking about kids specializing in caring about fairness and justice, she kind of lit up when she said that. And I just agree so much with that, which is the point of all of this work, right? Like there's the answer to a more hopeful future right there, the future generations. So we need educators to be in a good place.
And it was such a window too into how she doesn't personalize the remarkable things about her. Because she was like, as very young, I was very interested in justice and in fairness. But then her capacity to be like, oh, actually, that's a kid thing. Like that's organic to so many of us, and we lose touch with it. I was trying to think about, two things. One is I want to underscore her point about the caution flag of hierarchy versus levels, since it was so important to her to bring it in. I just thought that was elegant and epic. The other thing I realized after we got off, because I was like, why am I so attached to this woman after 1 hour with her? And some of it's obvious. It's because of who she is and how she presents. But I also realized she reminds me of my sister, Lisa, who died suddenly at 24. And she felt to me like what Lisa might be like had she had the opportunity to grow and contribute more. I'm excited to have my sister Leanne listen to it and see if she has that same experience. But
that's lovely.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. Do you have other points you want to make? Because I have a question for you that might be a good ending, if not.
No, I'm done.
This is related more because you read the book and you've led a school and you've done all the leadership work that you've done. But you mentioned after reading it that you thought a lot about going to implement. You said I've just made me want to go out and implement the things that I read in the book. So my question for you was, how would you start? Like if you were still in that role at Momentous Institute leading and you read that book, what would you go do?
Well, that's the great thing about the book. It tells you exactly how to work through it.
Okay.
It like maps it out and it helps you go like step by step.
Okay.
Where you take the theory, but then you personalize it to your school and your situation. It's just like a really expansive, humble theory that's like can morph into whatever educator is managing their own system. Because what it really helps you do is look at, do we have the right structure in place where people are getting good coaching, where there's a real balance between what's expected of someone and their time, compensation, decision-making power, like are those things aligned? And it gets you out of that where everything's so top-heavy, where the leader is supervising too many people or making too many decisions, having their hand in too many pies or pots, whatever that is. So yeah, it felt so actionable. I think that's why it got me excited, is I could picture like getting to do that work with a team and how invigorating it would be.
Okay, don't leave me to go do that. But
no, listen, I'm not ever going to do another job where I have to wear pants with buttons more than I currently do. So don't worry.
So is the book something that anyone in a school could bring and propose as kind of a guide for their team and their school? Or is it something that it needs to be someone in a leadership role brings it to the table?
Well, I mean, I think that depends on the system, because some systems are really open to anyone in the system bringing up ideas. And if that's the case, definitely. And you know, even if you have a smaller locus of control than the whole school or the whole district, there's things in this book that can help you think smarter about who's responsible for what and are we setting them up for success.
Or you could gift it to your principal. Or
yeah, exactly.
Secret Santa.
You know how Amazon does such a terrible job with notes if you send someone a gift? I've sent people gifts and they never get who it's from. They never get a note. I got a gift when I was going through surgery and there was no indication of who sent it.
It was from me.
It wasn't from you, because I called them and all they would tell me is the first initial of the person's first name. It was K. So I was like, I'm not going to reach out to everyone I know that starts with K and be like, did you send me a gift? Anyway, the mystery was ultimately solved. But yes, you could do an anonymous gift to your school leader, but you wouldn't have to. I think it's just so engaging and so inviting that I think it's going to be a magnet to leaders who want that hope-based path forward instead of the fear-based one.
I love it. And again, the book is called A New School Leadership Architecture by Dr. Lindsay Whorton.
Yay. Well, thanks, Chris, and thanks to Katie, our producer. And we will be back next week with a Radical Hope episode, and then we've got more interviews coming your way.
And by the way, the gift was from Katie.
It wasn't Katie. It was from the lovely Kim Mans, who's such a dear friend. She sent me a candle that on the candle it said, I wish we could take all the pain you might be going through and inflict it on someone we both hate, or something like that. It was
I don't know if that's a good way to end. Dun, dun, dun.
Namaste.
Okay.
Oh, too good. Too good. All right. All sides of us revealed in 60 minutes. Everybody have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Oxygen for Educators. Please like, share, and follow, and if inclined, leave us a 5-star review so that we can keep making content for you. Let us hear from you if you know someone we should interview or a topic we should cover.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guest and host and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any organization. The content is provided for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended as professional advice. Listeners are encouraged to use their own judgment and seek appropriate professional support when needed. Oxygen for Educators, its host, and production partners are not responsible for any actions taken based on the information shared in this podcast.